Good morning. That was weak. Is that the best you can do? Good morning.
Good morning.
Much gooder. Thank you. I'm going to talk with you today about what I call 4 nuggets. I call them nuggets just because they're special to me, and you know, I like nuggets. I've never had any gold nuggets, but I've had a lot of Chick-Fil-A nuggets, so I like nuggets. So these are nuggets for me. These are things that I've learned in my life, which has been a long one. That means I've made a lot of mistakes. But I've never really spoken about these 4 particular topics together, and hopefully we'll have time in the next few minutes just to briefly discuss each of them, but to put them together. But they're really like this. It's live simply, work hard, give generously, and dream big. So I'm going to talk about those one at a time. First of all, I want to talk about live simply. Now, I thought I knew all about living simply because I was born in the poorest county, in the poorest state in the United States. Now, I got to tell you what it is, don't I? I'm from Mississippi, okay? No argument there. All the stats say Mississippi is the poorest one in the nation. And according to a Harvard Business Review article published back in the summer, they did a study of the poorest and richest counties in the U.S., and USA Today reported that story also, and I actually read it in USA Today back in July, said that Holmes County, Mississippi was the poorest county in the United States. I was born in Holmes County, Mississippi. So if anybody knows about a simple life, I ought to know about it, right? Because I certainly didn't grow up in a wealthy home. My folks were plain old country folks. I was born when we lived on the farm. I'm a farmer. I've been an agricultural missionary. I'm still a hobby farmer. I got cows and goats and ducks and bees and whatever else. And I tell everybody I have it for the grandkids, but secretly I really do it for me because I enjoy it so much. So it's my therapy. I love it so much. But anyhow, I never really knew hunger. I was blessed to have Christian parents who took me to church and taught me to walk with the Lord. I was blessed to grow up in a home where God was honored, and I don't ever remember being hungry. We ate regularly. I ate a lot of peas and cornbread, which I still enjoy today, but still, we never went hungry. I remember going to 3 places in my life on vacation. One of those was to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which wasn't that far away. The other was to Rock City, which, boy, I thought was, it was fantastic. It was like Disney World to me. We didn't have Disney World then, but that was like Disney World to me, just to go to Rock City. And I took some grandkids back there recently, and I thought, I really was that excited about this. So anyhow, I mean, it's a nice place to visit. Don't get me wrong, and I'll take probably some more grandkids there. But it wasn't what I remembered it to be. But to me, it was a highlight of growing up. And then we went out to Texas to visit some relatives, and I thought I was going to the end of the world, actually. We went out to West Texas. I mean, it took days, it seemed like, to drive out there. But so I thought I, had been to the end of the world when I went to Texas. My world was pretty small, and life was pretty simple for me growing up. And I went to college. My cousin and I were the first of either of our families ever to go to college. So that was a big thing for me and for my first cousin when we went away to college. We didn't go to the same place, but anyhow, at the same time. But going to college meant a lot of changes, but the best thing that happened to me in college wasn't my degree, it was meeting my wife, Cheryl. So that was the best thing that happened to me. But Cheryl and I, after 6 years of marriage and after having 2 little baby boys, God called us into missions, and we committed ourselves to go to West Africa to serve. Now, that had not been part of our life's plan. I mean, if you'd asked me before that, I'd say, well, no, I didn't even know where West Africa was on the map. I knew Africa, I called it a country back then, but it's a continent. Hello, it's a continent. It's a big place. But it came out of the blue. So we went, first of all, and we flew internationally for the first time ever. We flew to France to start language school there, and don't worry, I'm not going to tell you our life story, but I'm just going to tell you this little bit of it here. So it'd be a long chapel if I told you my life story, wouldn't it? You don't have to laugh. But we went to France, and boy, that was really a culture shock. You know, I thought everything was made in the U.S. and that we'd invented everything, and I found out that a lot of things that we thought we'd made actually came from France and came from other European countries. So that was quite a shock for me. I was in quite a bit of culture shock coming from rural Mississippi to France, and boy, anyhow, that was quite an experience. But nevertheless, after a year of learning French there, we went on to West Africa, and we served in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast there, and for the first term. And then we wanted to move more inland, and I wanted to be an agricultural missionary, which was my desire all along. So we moved up to a country called, at the time, Upper Volta, which is now known as Burkina Faso. I think maybe y'all have had a mission trip there. How many of you have been to Burkina Faso? Raise your hand. Come on. Just you, David? You've been near there. Oh, then nobody knows how to spell Ouagadougou then, right? The capital city. Well, you got to learn to spell that before we leave the building today. So, Ouagadougou. Everybody say it. Ouagadougou. Ouagadougou. Say it again. Ouagadougou. Now, don't say you didn't learn anything in chapel today. You learned to say Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Okay. It's found in Lonely Planet Guides. So anyhow, I was an agriculturalist there, and I was a church planter also, and had a great time there. It was just a wonderful experience for us. We built our house there with some volunteers from the state of Tennessee who came to help us and help us build our home, and we built it there among the villages. We had only 10 roofs there all around. Everyone else had thatched roofs on their mud huts. We were the only white people within a 50-mile radius of any direction there. We lived in one of the poorest countries in the world where death from hunger and disease was a regular visitor to all the compounds there. I thought I'd lived a simple life until I moved to West Africa. The villagers' kind of simple life meant that the only clothes they had were the ones that they were presently wearing. It meant that they slept on not beds, but elephant grass mats that they wove themselves. It meant that they ground millet and corn, if they had enough water, with stones to make a cornmeal mush to subsist on that. It meant that that's what sustained them day by day. They had very little protein in their diet. They only ate meat on special events like a wedding or a funeral, and that was very rare. Their mode of transportation was to walk. If they had enough money or resources, then they would buy a bicycle. That would be their mode of transportation. There were no stores for them to shop in, just an outdoor market every 3 days. It was a very simple life. Their diet was not much. If you like boiled okra, you may like it a little because that's what they spiced it up with peppers and boiled okra, that mush. So you may like that, but not many of you all like your okra fried, I know. So God taught us a lot about how to live simply during those years in West Africa, those nearly 12 years, with some of the poorest people in the world. And today, though, living in the USA, it's very easy to complicate our lives by buying more things or acquiring more wealth. It's more difficult for us to live such a simple life here in the States because look around us. We're in prosperity now. I know you talk and you say, well, I'm just a poor student, but look at where you came from and look at who you are and what you're wearing and all the resources that you have at your disposal. We have to regularly remind ourselves that we don't really need everything that we think we need. There's a lot of difference between our need and our wants. Next time you say you need something, ask yourself, do I really need that or do I just want it? I dare you to ask yourself that. It's checked me on some things, things that I really don't need, I just want. Now, I have to confess that I have some things that I wanted. So I'm working on that also. But it's all about trying to simplify your life and not make it so complicated. One of Cheryl's friends made a little plaque for us a few years ago, and it kind of sums up this little nugget about living simply for me. The little plaque says it all for me. It says, live simply so that others may simply live. The second nugget is work hard. Now, my mother and dad are workaholics. My dad is 90, my mother is 88. I called my dad last week and I said, how's it going? He said, well, I'm a little bit tired now. I said, why are you a little bit tired? I mean, remember he's 90, okay? He said, well, I mowed the grass today, and I've been raking leaves the rest of the day. I said, well, my goodness, Pete, I call him Pete, my dad, Pete. I said, Pete, you ought to be tired. You're 90 years old. Look what you've done. So I said, what's my mom been up to today? He said, well, she's been cooking food to take to the church for a meal at the church. She's been cooking in the kitchen all day. And then she also made a caramel cake for a friend. And so she's 88. And she's been busy all day. They're workaholics. Oh, and by the way, she's legally blind. They're workaholics. That's the type of culture that I grew up in. That's the type of home that I grew up in. My parents are like that. They're always working and doing something for someone else. In my home, hard work was a virtue. We just worked hard. Now, our children and our grandchildren have a lot of stories about my work ethic because they say I try to make them work as hard as I do. But I gave up on that years ago and decided that I love to work. I mean, I just love working. If I'm not working at my work, then I'm working out on my hobby farm. I love to be busy, and it's therapy for me. All my personal assessments, all those things that you psychology majors have done on me and for me, all tell me I'm an overachiever. I know it, but I accept that. And I don't want to change because that's the way God made me. I don't expect anyone who works with me to work as hard as I do. Now, it took me a while to accept that. However, I have to admit that I still hate to hear people complain about how hard they've worked or how tired they are. So I just, in my mind, I just kind of shut that out when they start complaining about how tired they are. And, I mean, I don't know about you millennials. I mean, y'all seem to be tired a lot. You know, what's wrong with you guys? Work hard. You're young. You got the whole world before you. The harder you work today, the more you will enjoy life later, let me tell you. Because you'll make more money? No, because you will have learned more, and you will have done more, and you will have had more rich experiences through this hard work. I found a verse that helps me as a hard worker to keep the right perspective of those who don't work as hard as I do. So here it is from 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, the 14th verse. We urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. Patience. But I read that often, especially when I think people around me aren't working as hard as I am, that I'm supposed to be patient with them. Okay, so I have to go easy on people who don't have the same work ethic as I do, but whatever amount of work we do, even if they do less than me, all of us ought to concentrate, and we ought to believe in our heart of hearts that everything we should do should always be our best. My dad drilled in me early on when I was a little boy. I remember he said, anything worth doing is worth doing right. Any of your parents ever tell you that? Raise your hand. Oh, yeah, we got some here. Oh, y'all, they know Pete. They know my dad. Anything worth doing is worth doing right. So we ought to do our very best. Colossians, the 3rd chapter, 23rd, 24th verse says, whatever you do, work heartily. That's with full heart, with all you have. As for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward, you are serving the Lord Jesus Christ. This morning I was reading in Proverbs 10 and got another little nugget out of there. It said, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. I've read that, I'm sure, before, but it just popped this morning, I guess because I was going to be talking about working hard today. Let me read it one more time for you. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Now, cogitate on that for a moment. Anybody knows what that word means? What does cogitate mean? What? It's what? I'm sorry. Anybody know what cogitate means? Think what? Think about, but not just think about, think deeply about. Think deeply. I used to call one of my mentors, he lived till he was 94 years old, and I'd call him, and he said he outlived all of his friends. They all died, so he didn't have many friends. So I said, so what are you doing, Dr. McCall? He said, I'm cogitating. He paused. That's all he'd say. So then I'd wait for a moment, and I'd say, could you tell me what you're cogitating about? And then I'd pick up some gem or some nugget learning from him on the telephone. Cogitate. Well, cogitate on that if you would. The slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. All right, let's move on to giving generously. Got to check my time here. I want to read Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 through 19. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. See, God is the God, and He's Lord of all the resources of the world. He blesses us, and He expects us to bless others through our gift of financial and human resources, our money and our time. The Bible teaches that we should give. We all know that. The Bible talks a lot about giving. But I want to talk specifically about giving generously. Now, I know you as a college student are thinking, oh, this guy is way out. He doesn't know that I've eaten ramen noodles 3 times this week. I do. I know it. And I know the financial situation of college students. I've actually worked at a college. I've been an administrator and I've been a professor. So I know that. I understand that. I've had kids who are college students, and our oldest grandchild is just a freshman in college now. So I understand that. But so you're asking, so what can I give if I'm eating those ramen noodles? Too many people get hung up on the amount of the gift. The act of giving does not measure the amount of giving. Do you follow me? The act of giving doesn't really measure the amount of giving. It's the act of giving that's important. So giving generously for one person is different from the other person. It's defined by what you have at your disposal, what resources you have on hand. It's not about keeping score, but it is about giving our best. I've been a fundraiser for a college, and I've been a fundraiser for international missions, and I've seen some people give some huge gifts of money. It's amazing how much wealth we have in America now. There's some really prosperous people in America now. And they've given this huge amounts of money to some cause that's a worthy cause. But the gifts that I remember most through my life are not those huge gifts, those even millions of dollars that I've seen given to a cause. The gifts that I remember the most are those that were given from people who had very few resources. They were simple gifts that seemed insignificant to the world. One such gift was given to me in Burkina Faso. We had just spent a term of 3.5 years there, living there among the villagers in Burkina Faso. And we were headed back to the States for a few months to go back for some time in the States for a furlough. And we were saying goodbye to all the villagers, and they were walking from villages all around to tell us goodbye. I mean, you get very close to people when you live among them there, and these simple people. And this one particular guy I'm thinking about came with a gift. And his gift actually was 3 ears of corn, dried corn. Now, I have to tell you, to make this more significant, to tell you more about this corn. You see, this corn wasn't just corn. This was his seed corn that he would use to plant for the next wet season, the beginning of the rainy season. Everything depended on how much food they raised, because they don't farm for a living. They farm to live. So giving away some of the seed corn that he was going to use to plant for his family was a sacrificial gift for this man. And he told me, he said, Larry, you all have helped me to have more food for my family, and you all have introduced us to Jesus, and I want to bless someone else in the U.S. Would you take these 3 ears of corn back to some needy person in the USA? Now, what was I going to say? I said, yes, of course, because first of all, I would have embarrassed myself and him, because you never reject a gift, no matter what it is. You always accept that gift. So I took those 3 ears of corn, and I'd like to say that I gave them to some poor person, but I couldn't do that. I actually gave them to someone else over there without him knowing, because, first of all, I can't take grains of corn into the USA, so I would have probably been arrested, and one of those beagles would have barked at me at the airport. So anyhow, I didn't do that. So anyhow, many villagers, He gave up, let me just summarize that by saying, he gave up something that was of value to him without expecting something in value in return. So that's sacrificial giving. That's really generous giving. That's really biblical giving. When you hear of a need, do you think about what you should do about it? Maybe you think about it, but do you ever act on it if you hear about a need? There's no way that you can help with every need. There's no way. But then sometimes a still small voice speaks to our heart of hearts and says, you know, listen to this need. Maybe I should be doing something about it. And maybe that still small voice is urging you to respond. Then you should do something. The Spirit of God speaks to us and convicts us to act to help others who are in need. How long has it been since you have given a surprise blessing to someone else who needed a blessing? It doesn't matter how big it is. Maybe it was just money to buy a cup of coffee or a gift card for a cup of coffee or whatever. It's the act of giving that's measured, not the amount of the gift. The villagers who lived around us didn't have any medical care, and oftentimes they'd bring sick people to us. And I'm not a physician, nor is Cheryl, nor the son of a physician. So, I mean, I'm a farmer. I know how to doctor animals, and believe it or not, I use some animal medicine on a lot of people. And, I mean, we didn't have a lot of federal investigators looking at us all. We were just trying to save some lives and help some people. But anyhow, nevertheless, people would come there to us and when they were sick. And on one particular occasion, I'm going to tell you one story about a man who came. He'd become a believer, and he was a really poor guy. Had very little to eat, and we'd helped him some with some grain for his family. And he brought his little boy in his arms. He was about 7 years old, and his name was Robila. He brought Robila in his arms, and then he just laid him down at my feet. And he was sick. He was hot with a fever and didn't know what was wrong with him. I figured he had some kind of infection. Remember, I'm not a physician, but anyhow. So he laid him at my feet, and then he said, I'm leaving him with you to get well. And he said, I'll be back to pick him up later. And he left. Just like that. So, I mean, here he is. What am I going to do? We had to care for him. So we did, and Cheryl and I and some of the volunteers that were there with us helped care for him. And we actually had a nurse to come in as a volunteer during the time that he was there. He was there for about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, after giving him some antibiotics, he got well. And so anyhow, during the 3rd week, his father came back to pick him up. And his father came back, and he said, the first thing he asked someone there at the gate to our compound there. We had a mud wall around our compound, mostly just to keep goats and other animals out of our compound. But anyhow, he asked somebody at the gate, said, is my son still living? Because he expected him to be dead, Robila to be dead. So he said, no, Robila is healthy, and he's running and playing. See, he's over there. And he looked over there and saw him. He was just rejoicing. He was so happy. He went and got his son. He came back to me, and he said, Larry, I just don't know how to thank you. He said, I want to give you a gift. I said, you don't have to give me a gift. You don't owe me anything. We're just blessed to have been able to give him some medicines and that they worked and that God has healed him. Just let's give God the credit for this. He said, no, you don't understand. I have to give you a gift. He said, and the only gift I have to give you is Robila. So he took his shoulders of Robila and he pushed him to me until he was touching me. Now, remember I told you that you never refuse a gift. I had to have a fast track to God at that moment to think, how in the world am I going to get out of this one? He was giving me his son. So God answered my quick prayer. And I said, you know what? Robila has done really well, but he has complained a lot. He looked down at Robila and said, is that true? And Robila didn't say anything. I said, Robila has complained about the food because he doesn't really like the food that we cook. He's missed the food that he gets at home. He said, is that true? And Robila shook his head. I said, so, you know, to make Robila, my son, happy, would you take him back to your village and would you let him grow up there and I will help take care of him and provide for him? I got out of that one. I had 4 kids. But you see what happened there? He had to give something, and all he had was his son. He gave the best gift that he had. He gave his son. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? What does God expect of us? the best. He expects us to give the best because He gave us the best. When God sent Jesus Christ to earth as a newborn, He made mankind for all time the very best gift He could give. He gave His best, so we should give our best. All God asks for us is to give our best, and it may be small to us, but it'll be great in the eyes of God. So let's move on to the next nugget, and the last one. Dream big. Many people today never reach their full potential because they work too hard trying to be like someone else. I mean, you look around us. We focus on what other people are wearing, and the brands they're wearing, and the little emblems on them and all. And I've got a 16-year-old grandson. He's obsessed right now with what brand it is. I mean, he'd rather have one branded shirt than have 5 unbranded shirts and just keep washing it over and over, I guess. But I hope he's washing it. So anyhow, he may not be. We look at what other people are wearing, and we want to be like so-and-so. We find so many people who want to be like the crowd. You know, I believe that when I die and go to heaven, then I'm going to stand before God, and God's going to say to me, Larry, why did you try to be like somebody else and not be like Larry? Because I created you to be Larry, and you spent a lot of your life trying to be like someone else. I believe God's going to confront me with that because I'm guilty of that. But I recognize it now, and I accept who I am. I have more self-confidence in myself because I have said, I'm going to be like Larry because that's the way God created me. Accept yourself because God made you like that, and be the person that God created you to be. But dream big about who you want to be and who you need to be. Many people come to the end of their lives and they have regrets. I know that. I've talked to people who were dying, and they had lots of regrets, and they regret that they didn't spend more time with their family. They regret that they made some mistakes. But I believe that many of us will come to the end of our lives and we'll regret that we didn't take more risk. You know, we're afraid of risk. Not all risks are bad. Some of them are. I mean, I like to make decisions, and I make decisions. Now, as a leader, that's a little difficult for me to say, but I don't think there's anybody in here who works with me today, but I'll make quick decisions because my philosophy is, hey, I'm going to make the best decision that I can make today, because not to decide is to decide. If you say, I'm not going to decide, hey, you've already decided. So, what kind of decision are you going to make? You're going to make a bum one like saying, I'm not going to decide? That's a lousy decision because you did decide. So, I'll make a decision today because, hey, if I make a mistake tomorrow, I'll have a chance to make a better decision. Take some risk. Dream big. Dream the impossible. We should risk intentionally. Dream the impossible. Let me read you these lines from Alice in Wonderland. I can't believe that, said Alice. Can't you, said the Queen in a pitying note. Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes. Alice laughed. There's no use trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was your age, I always did it, dream the impossible, for half an hour each day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Today, how many impossible things have you even thought about? Why not? It's interesting how we make plans for our life. We make plans and we plan out the future, and those of you who are seniors particularly, you're really working on planning out the future, and even those others are planning out the future. But most of our plans are ones that we can accomplish alone. You see, they're woman-sized dreams or they're man-sized dreams. They're not God-sized dreams. There's no way that you ought to be thinking about things that you can't accomplish without the help of God. Otherwise, you don't need God. We lived in Cairo, Egypt, for a period when we were working in the Arab world. And there, you know, in Cairo is the Nile River. The Nile River comes out of the Blue Nile, out of the Ethiopia highlands, rich, beautiful, white, crystal clear water. And then the muddy waters, the source is down in Uganda on the border of Lake Victoria there, flows upwards, joins together to make the mighty Nile. we lived there, and there's a lot of history on the Nile River. You know, I mean, it's really great, interesting reading. I like to read historical things about the Nile River. But nevertheless, there you could rent boats with homemade sails, and go out on the Nile. And every one of those guys that had a homemade boat, they knew exactly, every one of them knew exactly where Moses put where they put baby Moses in the river. You know, everyone knew it, and it was all different place, of course. But they tell you this is the place right here. So anyhow, but the story's told there of a guy who was fishing in the Nile, and he would throw out his net, and he'd bring it in, and he would sort out the fish. And people watched him from the shores and from other boats, and every day he did the same thing. If he had a big fish, he would throw the big fish back in, and he only kept the small fish. Now, that doesn't seem practical or reasonable at all. Day after day, people would watch him throw the big fish back in and keep the small fish. Finally, someone asked him, "Why do you only keep the small fish and throw the big fish back in the river?" Then he reached down in his boat and he pulled out a pan. He said, "Because I only have a small frying pan." So what I want to ask you today, folks, how big is your frying pan? If it's man size or woman size, you don't need God. Dream big. Live simply. Work hard. Give generously. And dream big. In Mark, the 10th chapter, Jesus said, "With people it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God." Let's pray. Lord, we're thankful for the way that you give us the opportunity to make decisions about our lives. And even when we make bad decisions, Lord, you come along beside us if we walk with you, and you guide us through those bad decisions, and you help us out of those decisions. We're thankful, Lord, for the way that you walk with us as we walk with you. I pray, Lord, that these students and faculty would think about, Lord, these nuggets of living simply, work hard, give generously, and dream big. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen.